You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight you will hear them. Silence wasn't the only tenant in my house. It began as a murmur, a subterranean tremor of conversation leaking from the guest room at the blackest hour of night, when my only company should have been the four walls enclosing my solitary life. I know the texture of that sound, the chill that followed its wake. This account must be laid bare, exactly as it transpired, irrespective of the strain it places upon belief. 6 months prior, the colonial on Sycamore Lane became mine, a consequence of divorce and a depressed housing market. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, an absurd expanse for Arthur Finch alone. But the price was a balm. The guest room, however, remained a void, furnished sparsely with a bed, a dresser, and lingering cartons of Eleanor's possessions she'd yet to reclaim. That October Tuesday, deep into the night, cocooned in the flickering blue light of old sitcom reruns, the sound surfaced. Voices, unmistakably human, originating upstairs. My first thought, the television. A simple explanation swiftly negated when I pressed mute. The dialogue persisted. 2, perhaps 3 individuals engaged in discourse, their specific words lost to distance and walls, yet the cadence, the rhythm of speech, was undeniable. And it emanated from the guest room. A cold fist clenched around my heart. Sweat pricked my brow. Motionless on the sofa, I strained, every nerve attuned to the upper floor. The voices ebbed and flowed, conversational, almost placid, yet utterly alien within the secured confines of my home. The baseball bat, my sentinel beside the bed, felt heavy and unfamiliar in my grasp. My hands quaked. Each step on the wooden staircase announced my ascent with a groan, the sound amplifying the frantic drumbeat in my chest. As I climbed, the voices gained a slight clarity, though the meaning remained elusive, veiled. They sounded calm, disconcertingly casual, like neighbors chatting over a fence, but at an hour that screamed trespass inside walls I myself had locked. Darkness cloaked the upstairs hallway. I risked no lights. The source was confirmed, behind the guest room door. Pressing my ear to the cool wood, I held my breath, desperate for comprehension. Cannot continue like this. A man's voice, weary, frayed at the edges. Must. A woman, sharp with urgency. Hardly fair, too. Another male voice, resonance suggesting age. My hand, slick with sweat, reached for the knob. Slowly, meticulously, I turned it, fighting the urge to make noise. It stopped. Solid. Locked. A wave of ice flooded my veins. I never locked this door. It couldn't be locked. No key existed for it, a relic lost to previous owners, according to the realtor's assurances. But the mechanism was firmly engaged. I tried again, applying more force. Immovable. The door stood defiant. Inside, the voices ceased abruptly. An unnerving, total silence descended. Hello. My voice fractured, thin in the oppressive quiet. Who's in there? Nothing. I hammered a fist against the panel. I hear you. Get out now, or I'm calling the police. The silence deepened, absolute and mocking. Scrambling downstairs, phone clutched tight, I dialed 911. 2 patrol cars materialized within minutes, their approach stealthy, lights extinguished. While I shivered on the lawn, officers swept through the house, room by room. Their findings: nothing. No breached windows, no forced locks. Everything secured from within. And the guest room door, it swung open readily at their touch. "You certain about those voices, Mr. Finch?" the older officer asked, his flashlight beam probing the empty corners of the guest room. "Sometimes the quiet can play tricks on you this late." I knew the solidity of that locked knob, the distinct timbre of the conversation, yet faced with their calm skepticism, what recourse had I? A nod, a mumbled thanks. They departed, leaving me alone with the echoes. Sleep became a forgotten country that night, and for many nights thereafter. A state-of-the-art security system was installed, cameras vigilantly watching every portal. New locks clicked into place on every door. Yet, a hollow certainty persisted. These measures were futile. A week later, the voices returned. 3:00 a.m. The same indistinct colloquy drifting from the guest room. The same inexplicable resistance from the locked door that possessed no key. This time I fumbled for my phone, hit record, capturing the air around me. Later, playback yielded only a hiss of empty static. The occurrences became a rhythm of dread, sporadic at first, then accelerating in frequency. Always nocturnal. Always those 3 disembodied voices, locked and mundane, yet utterly terrifying, conversation I could never fully decipher. Always the door, sealed by unseen hands. My nights migrated to the downstairs sofa. The whiskey bottle emptied faster. Selling crossed my mind, a fleeting thought crushed by the absurdity of explaining spectral tenants to potential buyers. Who would possibly credit such a tale? My own conviction wavered in the harsh light of day. Then, the tenor shifted. One frigid December night, a new sound threaded through the familiar murmur: weeping. A woman's profound, shattering sobs tore through the muffled dialogue. The men's voices escalated in response, gaining an edge of anger, of urgency. Positioned at the foot of the stairs, bat clutched tight, I was rooted by a primal fear as the weeping intensified. A sudden crash resonated from within the room, the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor. More anguished crying. Propelled by a surge of adrenaline, I bolted upstairs, seized the doorknob, still locked. "Stop it!" I yelled, pounding against the wood. "Leave her alone!" Instantaneously, the weeping ceased. Silence crashed down again, thick and absolute. Then, footsteps, unmistakably clear, traversing the guest room floor, moving toward the door. Deliberate, slow. Each footfall a hammer blow against my ribs. I stumbled backward down the hall as the steps halted directly on the other side of the panel. I could hear breathing, ragged, close. Someone or something stood inches away, separated only by the thin barrier of wood. I fled. Down the stairs, out the front door, into the frigid sanctuary of my car. I drove until the familiar streets dissolved, found refuge in a sterile motel room, and remained absent for 2 days. Upon my cautious return, the guest room appeared undisturbed, exactly as it had always been. No evidence of the violent crash I'd witnessed with my ears. The door opened without protest, methodically, I dismantled the room's contents, sifted through Eleanor's boxes, shifted furniture, scrutinized every inch of plaster and floorboard. Nothing. Until my gaze fell upon the door itself, the interior side. There, etched into the wood at roughly eye level, were 3 long, ragged scratches. They hadn't been there before. A priest, Father Dominic, came, armed with blessings and holy water, sprinkling droplets in every corner. He sensed no overt evil, he offered, but promised prayers. The voices persisted. A psychic, Ms. Eris Thorne, arrived trailing sage smoke and clutching crystals. After hours of wandering the house, she declared the presence of multiple energies, insistent but not inherently malevolent. The voices persisted. A psychiatrist, Dr. Anya Sharma, listened patiently, prescribed medication for anxiety, and gently suggested stress-induced auditory hallucinations. The voices persisted. Winter bled into a hesitant spring. The spectral conversation became an unwanted, nocturnal soundtrack to my life. Sometimes argumentative, sometimes laced with unsettling laughter, sometimes punctuated by sorrow. Always late. Always sequestered behind that impossible lock. A strange acclimatization occurred. I stopped leaping at every murmur. I began to document, meticulously logging times, durations, any snatched fragments of dialogue. Patterns surfaced. Activity concentrated between 1 Dags and 4 a.m., predominantly on weeknights. The woman's name sounded like Clara. One of the men possessed a recurring dry cough. My own shouted interjections went unacknowledged, absorbed by the walls. The door remained steadfastly locked during their presence, yielding only after their departure. April 15th altered the trajectory. The date is seared into memory, freshly inked from completing my tax forms. Around 2:30 a.m., the voices erupted, transformed. No longer muffled conversation, but raw shouting. All 3 participants. The sickening sound of objects shattering. The woman, Clara, screamed a piercing cry of terror. No, please, don't. Bat in hand, I charged the stairs again, possessed by a desperate fury, ready to splinter the wood to force entry. Her screams intensified. A man's voice roared, "You brought this on yourself!" More violent crashes echoed from within. I swung the bat, connecting solidly with the door. Wood groaned, splintered, but held. Again. The cacophony inside seemed to swell with each impact, feeding on my frantic assault. One final desperate blow, and the door burst inward. Emptiness greeted me. Stark. Absolute vacancy. No struggling figures, no shattered debris. Nothing disturbed. But the cold. It was profound. Biting. My breath plumed visibly in the air. The window remained shut, locked tight. Then my eyes caught movement on the polished hardwood floor. Liquid. A small, dark puddle coalescing near the room's center. Even as I watched, paralyzed, it expanded, spreading outward with unnatural speed. The fluid was viscous, dark. Hesitantly, I touched its edge. Blood. I recoiled, stumbling backward. The pool continued its impossible growth, staining the floorboards, creeping relentlessly toward the threshold where I stood. The temperature plummeted further. The frigid air felt thick, heavy. The blood reached my shoes. And then, a whisper, intimate and chilling, directly beside my ear. The woman's voice, startlingly clear for the first terrifying time. Help us. Once more, I ran. Spent the remainder of the night huddled in my car, parked under the indifferent fluorescent glare of a Walmart lot. Returning the next day, bracing for the aftermath, I found nothing. The blood vanished without a trace. The room pristine, the air still carrying a residual chill. That was 3 days ago. Silence has reigned since. The door remains compliant. The room stays empty. Yet the atmosphere has shifted, thickened somehow, pregnant with anticipation, as if the voices are merely holding their breath, waiting, observing. Yesterday yielded another discovery. Driven by a gnawing unease, I delved into digitized newspaper archives, searching the house's address, its history. An article from 1985 surfaced. Clara, Vance missing after dispute. The text detailed her disappearance following an argument with her husband and his brother in their home. This home. Her body, never recovered. The men maintained she had simply left. Police investigated, found insufficient evidence, closed the case. Accompanying the article, a photograph of the house, eerily identical save for one jarring detail. The guest room window was depicted shattered. The caption noted the damage occurred during what the husband termed Clara's abrupt departure. I record this now because I feel their imminence. The silence is a pause, not an ending. Clara is not finished. The men are not finished. Whatever horror unfolded within that room decades ago remains unresolved, reverberating. And perhaps I now understand why I was chosen as the audience. Yesterday, finally confronting the last of Eleanor's boxes, I unearthed an old family photo album, one I'd never seen. Flipping through the stiff pages, my gaze snagged on a faded image of Eleanor's grandmother as a young woman. Beneath it, a delicate script identified her. Clara Vance. They're back. Even as these words form, the familiar murmur rises from upstairs, sharper now, more defined than ever before. They are calling my name. Arthur. The guest room door, I know without checking, is locked once more. But tonight, retreat is not an option. Tonight, I ascend the stairs not with a baseball bat, but with a sledgehammer. What awaits behind that door remains unknown, a terrifying void. But Clara deserves witness. Eleanor's grandmother deserves release. And I demand answers. If this chronicle is where my voice falls silent, you will know the location. The guest room, behind the locked door that has no key. Listen. Just listen for the voices. The heat rippling off the asphalt ahead resolved itself, coalescing from shimmering distortion into a stark human outline. My breath caught. There, solitary against the immense vacancy of the road, stood a figure, thumb angled skyward. As the car devoured the distance, a fleeting impression registered, a face etched with exhaustion, eyes broadcasting a silent desperation. Beside me, Clara drew a sharp, small breath. "Did you see him?" she murmured. I could only nod, my grip strangling the steering wheel. Because I had. And a cold certainty settled in my gut that we would see him again. That same lonely traveler, impossibly relocated miles further down this ribbon of sun-baked road. I am Leo Vance. What began as a celebratory journey with my wife, a pilgrimage across state lines, swiftly spiraled into a waking dread that defied sanity. We'd been swallowed by the Nevada void for hours, the landscape an unblinking panorama of ochre and dust, punctuated only by skeletal gas stations or diners clinging precariously to existence. Our 7th anniversary, marked by a westward drive from the familiar coast towards the stark majesty of Zion, a scenic detour through the American desert's parched heart. Those initial days hummed with a gentle harmony. We resurrected old melodies on the crackling radio, indulged in nonsensical roadside diversions, watched the terrain bleed from green to gold to barren rock. But crossing into Nevada's vast emptiness shifted something intangible. The air acquired a weight, the quiet pressed in. Even the radio succumbed, dissolving into a persistent hiss of static that no amount of dial twisting could resolve. We first encountered the traveler perhaps an hour into that desolate stretch. He materialized abruptly, seemingly conjured from the wavering heat itself. A lone shape beside the highway, arm extended, gaze obscured by dark, impassive lenses. Hurtling past at speed, I absorbed only fragments. Sun-darkened skin, clothes frayed by time and elements, a rucksack that sagged with weary history. Should we? Clara began, twisting to peer through the rear window. I cut her off with a shake of my head. The cardinal rule, remember? Never invite strangers in, especially out here. She subsided, though the unease lingered in the set of her shoulders. I hope he finds a ride. It looks unforgiving. I offered hollow assurances about other drivers, pushing the car onward. Yet, a disquiet had taken root deep within me, a cold counterpoint to the desert blaze. 20 minutes later, there he was. Identical posture, same tattered attire, that unwavering stance of need. Utterly impossible. We hadn't slowed, hadn't deviated. No conceivable way existed for him to have preceded us. Leo. Clara's voice was thin, strung tight with disbelief. Is that... It can't be, I countered, the denial tasting false on my tongue. Even as I spoke, the chilling recognition solidified. It was him, inexplicably, impossibly, the same man. We shot past again. This time his face came into sharper focus. Gaunt, the features almost skeletal beneath the tan. And his eyes, behind the glasses. Something profoundly wrong. Too dark, too deep. Like twin voids punched into his skull. Clara and I lapsed into a heavy silence, the engine's drone filling the space where logic failed. Each of us scrambled internally for explanations. A trick of the heat, another vagrant bearing an uncanny resemblance, the monotonous landscape inducing shared hallucination. But the shared knowledge resonated between us, unspoken. Something fundamental was askew. The third appearance, 15 minutes further on, tore a scream from Clara, because he wasn't beside the road this time. He stood squarely in the center of our lane, an unmoving obstacle directly ahead. I slammed the brakes. Tires shrieked protest as we fishtailed, halting mere feet from the impassive figure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I felt in my throat. Clara's knuckles were bone white where she gripped the dashboard. The traveler remained motionless, his unseen gaze fixed upon us through those impenetrable lenses. Slowly, with unnerving deliberation, he lifted a hand, index finger extending to point directly at our car. "Oh, gods, Leo," Clara whimpered. "What do we do?" The same question echoed in my own skull. Every primal instinct shrieked to throw the car in reverse, to flee this apparition. Yet, a morbid fascination, a desperate need to comprehend, pinned me there. Hesitantly, I lowered my window. A blast of superheated air rushed in, carrying with it an odor that defied simple description. The scent of decay, of something long dead left to desiccate under the relentless sun. "What is it you want?" My voice emerged thin, inadequate against the vast silence. The traveler's mouth shaped words, but the sound that issued forth was alien. Static, clicks, mechanical whirs. A transmission from nowhere that raised the hairs on my neck. Then abruptly, he ceased to be. Not vanished into the distance. Not faded. Simply gone. Present one instant, absent the next. Clara and I stared at each other, faces pale, bodies trembling. "Did that actually happen?" she whispered. I nodded, incapable of speech. My mind spun, grappling futilely with the experience. It resisted all known laws, all rational thought. With hands that shook, I shifted the car into drive, easing forward. We drove cloaked in silence, each adrift in private terror, starting at every dancing heat mirage, every elongated shadow stretching across the asphalt. As the sun bled towards the horizon, painting the desert in violent hues of orange and bruised purple, a small diner materialized by the roadside, its neon sign a lonely beacon. By mutual, unspoken consent, I turned in. We craved respite, a moment to steady ourselves, perhaps find a sliver of normalcy in coffee and stale pie. The diner breathed emptiness. A pair of truckers hunched over the counter. An old timer occupied a booth by the window, gazing out. We slid into worn vinyl seats. A waitress approached, her name tag proclaiming Martha. "Get you folks something?" she asked, pen hovering. We ordered coffee, pie. As Martha turned away, the questions spilled out of me unbidden. "Ever hear any odd tales about this stretch of road?" Martha paused, half-turned, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Odd how?" I faltered, unsure how to articulate the madness without sounding unhinged. Like things that can't be explained. People seeing things. Things that shouldn't be there. A flicker crossed Martha's face. Concern, yes, but shaded with something akin to recognition. Her gaze darted around the near-empty room before she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You saw him, didn't you?" she breathed. "The traveler." Clara gasped beside me. A glacial chill traced my spine. "You know about him?" Martha nodded, her expression grave. "Haunts this road. Has for longer than memory. Some say ghost of a man died out here. Lost. Always thumbing for a ride he never gets. Others say he's something different. Not from around here, if you catch my drift." She straightened abruptly, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Just old stories," superstitions. Desert plays tricks, you know. Heat and light. With a forced smile, she bustled off for our order. Clara and I sat poleaxed, the waitress's words hanging in the air. "Leo," Clara said finally, her voice quavering. "I want to go home. Forget Zion, just get us out of here." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "First, light," I promised. "Find a motel, sleep, head back to the coast come dawn." Even as I spoke, doubt gnawed. Would it be so simple? Would he permit our departure? We consumed the pie mechanically, lost in the swirling vortex of our fear. While settling the bill, I noticed the old timer by the window observing us, his gaze unnervingly steady. As we moved towards the door, his voice rasped out, dry as the desert wind. "Can't outrun him, you know." Clara went rigid beside me. "What do you mean?" I asked, though a part of me screamed against knowing more. The old man's watery eyes fixed on mine. "He ain't looking for a lift, son. He's looking for relief. Someone to take his post on this godforsaken highway so he can finally move on." The chill deepened, settling into my bones. "How do you know?" A melancholy shadow of a smile touched the man's weathered lips. "Been running myself. 40 years now. Since the night I drove on by, thinking I was smart, not picking up strays." He turned his gaze back to the window, scanning the deepening twilight outside. "No escape," he repeated softly. "Don't matter how far or how fast. He's always there, waiting, till you give in, or find some other poor soul to take your place." Clara tugged urgently at my sleeve, her eyes wide with primal terror. "Leo, please, let's go." I nodded dumbly, steering her out into the cooling air. As we crossed the gravel towards our car, the old timer's pronouncement echoed relentlessly in my head. "Can't outrun him." We drove into the swallowing darkness, pushing the engine, nerves frayed, jumping at every roadside shadow, every flicker in the periphery. But speed offered no solace, distance no comfort. The sensation of being pursued, shadowed, clung to us like the pervasive dust. Each glance into the rearview mirror carried the sickening expectation of seeing a gaunt silhouette materialize in the back seat. A death's head grin splitting its face, ready to claim its due. The desert stretched on, infinite and indifferent, and I knew with a certainty that froze my soul. Our journey was nowhere near its end. The traveler was out there, patient, waiting. And sooner or later, another encounter was inevitable. Even now, the memory retains its electric charge. The moment my gaze snagged on that antiquated black and white photograph amidst the clutter of a collector's auction. It resided in an unassuming timber frame, propped on a minor display table skulking near the room's shadowed rear. The image captured a substantial house, distinguished by lofty windows, and a veranda that coiled around its structure. Though the grounds appeared meticulously kept, the photograph itself was starved of detail, steeped in a melancholic dimness, edges softened by blur. Yet an inexplicable magnetism emanated from it, a siren call I felt no urge to dissect. Instinct propelled my arm skyward. The winning bid was mine. I departed the auction house, clutching the framed image, flush with the conviction of having unearthed a singular treasure. A conviction I now curse, wishing I had simply walked on by. 3 days post-auction, the photograph found its designated place upon my living room wall, nestled near the corner window. The frame, venerable as it was, possessed a small clasp on its reverse, allowing it to hang securely from a stout nail I'd hammered in. Stepping back, I surveyed my acquisition. In that moment, the edifice depicted seemed merely an anonymous mansion, dredged from bygone decades. I idly mused on its potential survival, somewhere in the tangible world. But the immediate sensation, once it was positioned, was one of disquiet. The windows gaped, dark and vacant as ocular sockets. Twin front doors stood resolutely sealed, the porch projecting an aura of profound desertion. Life, by all visible metrics, had evacuated the scene. The inaugural night passed without incident. Exhaustion from a protracted workday had dulled my senses, affording the picture no more than a cursory glance before slumber claimed me. Dawn arrived, and with it, my customary coffee. Entering the living room, I paused, arrested by the photograph. It felt altered. Drawing nearer, I discerned a nebulous luminescence originating from behind an upper-floor window pane. A soft glow, suggestive of an interior lamp, ignited. I could have sworn its absence the day before. For a protracted minute, I stood transfixed, rubbing my eyes, whispering justifications about initial inattention. That flimsy excuse served its purpose. I drained my mug and departed for the office. The subsequent evening found me returning late to a silent apartment. My bag dropped onto the sofa with a sigh. My eyes sought the photograph immediately. Now, 2. Windows on the uppermost story pulsed with that faint light, while the lower casements seemed to possess newfound depth. Within their panes, ethereal lines coalesced, hints of furniture perhaps, or shadowy silhouettes. A prickling sensation traversed my arms, my chest constricted. Logic screamed the impossibility. Photographs do not morph. I forced measured breaths, scrutinizing the print, searching for some trick of light, some errant reflection cast by my own living room lamp. Extinguishing the lamp yielded no change. The internal glow persisted within the monochromatic world. There I stood, enveloped in darkness, gaze locked onto that static scene, grappling with an inexplicable phenomenon. My fingers traced the cool glass, seeking imperfections, textures, paint, finding only flawless smoothness. It remained the same artifact, yet undeniably evolved. Sense dissolved. From that point forward, the image colonized my thoughts. Daylight hours at my desk, ostensibly devoted to emails and calls, were fractured by intrusive replays of the photograph's shifting visage. Each night became a frantic pilgrimage home, driven by the need to witness the latest transformation, and transformations always awaited. One evening, the porch boards appeared sharper, as if freshly stained. Another time, a side door, previously indistinct, seemed ajar, gaping into an inky void. Then came the shapes materializing on the lawn, not distinct figures, but rather human-shaped smudges, phantasmal outlines of limbs and torsos. Prolonged scrutiny lent them a terrifying verisimilitude. My throat would parch, A hollow ache would bloom in my stomach. Attempts at diversion, music, television, calls to friends proved futile. Inevitably, my gaze drifted back, ensnared by the photograph on the wall. One evening, I invited my friend, Liam, for dinner, deliberately withholding mention of the picture. I harbored a morbid curiosity. Would he perceive anything amiss? Post-meal, we settled in the living room. He recounted workplace anecdotes. I feigned attention, my focus surreptitiously monitoring his gaze. Mid-sentence he faltered, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on the wall. He rose, ambled towards the frame, leaning in for intense inspection. "Where do you get this weird thing?" he inquired, brow furrowed. I merely nodded, anticipating more. Confusion clouded his features as he remarked on the peculiar forms within the windows. He ventured a guess. Some sort of interactive art, perhaps, designed to change under varying illumination. Relief washed over me, sharp and fleeting. I wasn't hallucinating. Someone else saw it. But the relief curdled instantly into dread, solidifying the reality of the impossible. I recounted the entire saga, beginning with the auction. Liam listened, rapt and silent, a palpable unease growing in his posture. His suggestion was practical. Take it down. Sequester it in a closet. I complied readily, lifting the frame from its nail, placing it face down upon the coffee table. We attempted a movie, but its narrative was lost on me, my entire being attuned to the unseen photograph mere feet away. Liam departed eventually, leaving me to consign the picture to a box in the depths of my storage room. A knot of tension remained lodged between my shoulder blades, yet its banishment from sight offered a fragile respite. Sleep, I prayed, would be the ultimate antidote. Morning broke early. An irresistible compulsion drew me towards the storage room. Curiosity, I told myself. Nothing more. Opening the box, I found the photograph undisturbed. I lifted it, turned it over. The house stood unchanged, but the shadows dappling the lawn seemed bolder, closer, having crept towards the foreground. A tremor ran through my hand. I hastily returned the picture to its cardboard prison, slammed the storage door shut, and fled for work. Throughout the day, an uncomfortable psychic itch persisted. The photograph exerted its pull. Upon returning home, resistance crumbled. I retrieved it from the storage room, placing it on the coffee table once more, surrendering to its scrutiny. The shadows now occupied the porch itself. Leaning closer, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, pulse throbbing in my neck, I strained to see. Was that the faint curvature of a head, the slope of a shoulder? The darkness obfuscated certainty, yet the impression of figures was undeniable, potent. A primal urge to destroy it warred with an equally potent, inexplicable reluctance, as if annihilation might unleash something far worse. Drawn and repulsed in equal measure, I succumbed to a perverse need to chronicle its evolution. Fetching a notepad, I began meticulous documentation. Wednesday, one of the porch doors now stood partially ajar. Thursday, a second figure manifested near the lawn's edge, draped in what resembled a long coat. Friday, light bloomed in the space I presumed to be the foyer. Each notation tightened the screws of my anxiety. Sleep became a shallow, restless affair, every nocturnal creak of the house triggering a jolt of adrenaline. My gaze perpetually strayed to the photograph, half expecting its inhabitants to step forth into my reality. One night found me slumped on the sofa, listlessly turning magazine pages, a solitary lamp casting long shadows in the otherwise quiet living room. The photograph lay face down on the coffee table, its gaze averted, though its presence remained palpable. Then, a sound, faint, dry, scraping. Not loud, but undeniably emanating from the coffee table's vicinity. A jolt, sharp and cold, shot through my chest. My skin turned clammy. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered the magazine, rising on legs that felt suddenly insubstantial. Approaching the table, I saw the photograph unmoved, but the box previously behind it had shifted, perhaps an inch. My eyes darted around the room. No draft, nothing else disturbed. How? My heart hammered violently, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. With trembling hands, I lifted the frame, flipped it over. The front door of the house in the picture now stood wide open, and framed within the doorway, a figure stood upon the threshold, sharper than the others. Broad shoulders, short hair, a chillingly familiar silhouette. It looked like me. My stomach plummeted. A strangled gasp escaped me, one hand flying to cover my mouth. I set the photo down abruptly, recoiling. My arms quaked, my head swam. Me, or an eidolon crafted in my exact likeness, poised at the entrance of that spectral house. The sheer impossibility paralyzed thought. My eyes burned, dry from lack of blinking. Rubbing my face fiercely, I paced the confines of the room, breath catching in ragged bursts. A scream built in my throat, a desperate need to shatter the suffocating tension. I snatched my phone, dialing Liam, my previous dinner guest. Voicemail. I left a garbled message, voice trembling, pleading for a return call. Then, my gaze returned, magnetically, to the photograph. The figure remained motionless, simply standing there, facing outwards. Sleep was a forgotten country that night. The photograph stayed on the coffee table, face up, an object of morbid vigil. I sat hunched on the sofa, every light in the apartment blazing defiantly against the encroaching dread. My body screamed for rest, but my mind, wired and frantic, refused surrender. Around 2 a.m, as exhaustion began to fray the edges of consciousness, a soft tapping intruded, gentle, rhythmic, like knuckles rapping against glass. I snapped upright, instantly awake, heart seizing. Looking wildly around, I realized the sound seemed localized to the photograph. On unsteady legs, I approached, peering intently. The glass surface remained smooth, inert. My own fingertip tapped against it, producing a dull thud. The answering tap did not repeat, yet its echo lingered, undeniable, in my memory. My palms grew slick, my shirt clung damply to my back. I felt adrift, unmoored from reality, within the familiar geography of my own living room. The following day, I reported sick to work. Functionality was beyond me, my psyche entirely consumed by the unfolding nightmare. The morning dissolved in fruitless online searches, desperate attempts to identify the photograph, the house, anything. Keywords like sepia mansion, haunted photograph, Elias Thorne auctioneers yielded nothing resembling the image that held me captive. Defeated, I returned to the living room. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, bathing the space in a deceptive warmth. The photograph, however, appeared to have absorbed the ambient light, growing darker. The sky within its frame had turned ominous, bruised with storm clouds coalescing above the roofline, a detail previously absent. My own reflection stared back from the glass, pale, gaunt. The figure, my doppelganger, still occupied the doorway, but now seemed subtly shifted, as if initiating a step off the porch, onto the lawn. My chest tightened painfully. My hands felt distant, numb. I braced myself against the sofa's back. Destroying it, smashing the glass, burning the print, felt viscerally wrong. A transgression against some unknown protocol, potentially inviting retribution. The changes were insidious, incremental, yet each ratcheted the internal pressure unbearably. I fell into a rhythm of compulsive checking, hourly surveillance tracking the progress of my spectral twin. I began to patrol my own apartment, peering behind doors, scanning through windows, half expecting to confront my double lurking just outside. By late afternoon, the figure in the photograph had advanced fully into the yard. Its face, my face, was now rendered with unnerving clarity. The eyes were blank voids, the lips slightly parted, its head tilted upward, fixing its vacant gaze upon the observer. My throat constricted. The terrifying notion crystallized. It was trying to emerge. I pictured it fluidly detaching from the paper, coalescing into solid form within my living room. My pulse surged. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. Methodically, foolishly, I locked every door and window in my apartment, craving the illusion of a barrier. As evening bled into night, I resumed my vigil on the sofa, staring at the photograph. The sky within its borders was now nearly pitch black, simulating nightfall. Porch lights glowed eerily, illuminating more indistinct shadows congregating in the yard, and the figure resembling me stood perilously close to the frame's lower edge, poised as if to step beyond the picture's confines altogether. A shiver traced its icy path down my spine. I rubbed my arms uselessly against the chill. The apartment's silence felt immense, oppressive. My breath came shallow and quick. My phone remained clutched in my hand, a useless talisman. Liam hadn't called back. The clock showed past 9. I forced down some food, tasteless fuel for a body running on fear. The urge to hide the photograph warred with the compulsion to watch it. Each glance sent my heart into overdrive. Each moment I looked away, my imagination conjured terrifying scenarios of its unseen progress. Hours crawled by in restless pacing. Close to midnight, I extinguished the main lights, leaving only the small lamp beside me burning, a tiny island of light in the encroaching dark. I sat near the coffee table, the photograph a mere foot away. The very air felt thick, charged. My shoulders ached with tension. My eyes flickered constantly. Photograph, room, photograph, shadows. Every settling groan of the building, every subtle shift of the floorboards, amplified into a potential threat. Around 1 a.m, I saw it. The figure's foot was now halfway past the bottom edge of the frame. Breath hitched in my throat. Leaning forward, heart galloping, I felt sweat bead on my temple. My hands trembled uncontrollably. Reaching out, I pressed my fingertips against the cool, solid glass. It offered no resistance, yet the image behind it showed the figure almost entirely escaped. I jerked back, clenching my fists, my mind screaming silent warnings. Any second now, something might flicker in my peripheral vision. I whipped my head around, scanning the darkened corners of my own home. Nothing. Utter solitude. It is now deep into the night. Writing this feels like the only anchor, a way to impose order on the unraveling chaos. The photograph sits on the table, facing me. The figure, my figure, is almost gone from its two-dimensional prison. Only its head and shoulders remain visible at the very bottom edge. Elsewhere in the frame, the other shadows linger. The house windows blaze with internal light. The thudding of my pulse reverberates in my ears. My mouth is desert dry. My gaze keeps darting towards my own front door, anticipating a knock, the turn of the handle. Terror and a strange, hyper-alertness keep me pinned here. I can hear my own frantic heartbeat. My entire body is coiled, braced for impact. I am consumed by the certainty that whatever resides within that photograph is actively seeking egress into my world, and I fear I am powerless to prevent it. Exhaustion gnaws at me, yet turning away feels impossible now. My eyes remain fixed on the picture. If movement occurs, I will react. How, I don't know, but I must be ready. This is my current reality. Sitting here, writing, hoping this act of articulation lessens the crushing isolation. No explanation exists for a photograph that breathes, that evolves, that births a doppelganger poised to step out of its frame. I only know that it does, and that figure is nearly free. I watch its last visible remnants. I watch my front door. I wait, and I pray, against all conviction, that nothing happens. There is no one left to call who might believe this madness. I am trapped in this bizarre vigil, straining to interpret every sound, scrutinizing every play of shadow on my walls. My eyes sting, protesting the constant strain, but blinking feels like a dangerous gamble. Each time my eyelids flutter shut, a cold dread grips me. That when they open again, the figure from the photograph will no longer be in the picture, but standing right here, before me. These woods, I'd sought them as sanctuary, but they became a cage. Unseen bars erected by a phantom warden. A seasoned devotee of the wild, I'd always found restoration in the deep hush of the forest, in the elemental challenge of subsistence. This venture was charted as another restorative pilgrimage, a solitary week immersed in the Ozark heartland, leagues distant from the faintest murmur of humankind. My preparations were exacting, my pack balanced, my spirit buoyant as I stepped onto the trail, anticipation thrumming within me. The initial days unfolded in tranquil perfection. I ventured far into the backcountry, establishing my haven in a modest clearing beside the liquid whispers of a creek. The elements conspired in my favor. Nights crisp with chill, days bathed in benevolent sunshine. Time dissolved into explorations, the quiet study of flora, the satisfying pull of trout from the stream for my supper. Each evening, seated by the flickering tongues of my fire, witnessing the first pinpricks of starlight pierce the deepening velvet expanse above, a profound serenity settled over me. It was the fourth night when the idol shattered. I jolted awake in the dense pre-dawn blackness, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs, the cause initially obscure. Lying rigid within my nylon shell, straining to decipher the night sounds, I pinpointed the disturbance. Footfalls, muffled yet distinct, pacing a deliberate circle around my campsite. Instinct first suggested fauna. A browsing deer, perhaps, or even a black bear drawn by the phantom scent of cooked fish. Yet, the cadence. It was too measured, too unnervingly human. Breath held captive in my lungs. I prayed for the presence, whatever it was, to simply pass by. The steps completed their circuit, paused, and then a sound that iced my veins. The slow, grating rasp of my backpack zipper being drawn open. Adrenaline detonated within me. My fingers, clumsy with dread, scrabbled for the torch. Flicking it on, I tore open my tent flap in a single, desperate movement. The beam sliced through the vacant clearing. My pack rested where I'd left it near the fire pit, yet its main flap gaped, contents subtly disarranged, a quiet violation. Of the nocturnal visitor, no trace remained. I scrambled out, bare soles recoiling from the dew-kissed earth. Hello. My voice emerged thin, a frightened thread in the immense dark tapestry. Is anyone there? Only the indifferent murmurings of the forest offered reply. The remainder of the night was a vigil, perched upright, torch clutched in one hand, hunting knife a cold promise in the other. Every snapped twig, every rustle of unseen leaves, sent jolts through my system. As the eastern horizon began to bleed with the pale hues of dawn, I permitted a sliver of relief. Surely, I reasoned, it was merely shadows and solitude birthing phantoms in my mind. But stepping from the tent into the morning chill, my gaze fell upon evidence that solidified the fear. There, pressed into the soft loam surrounding my camp, were prints. Booted footprints, unequivocally human, describing the exact circle I'd heard traced in the darkness. Kneeling, hands trembling, I examined them. Large, suggesting a man, impressed deep as if weighted. They tracked away into the timber, precisely along the route I'd intended to hike that day. I stood frozen for a long count, caught between the primal scream to dismantle camp and flee, and a mulish refusal to yield my hard-won solitude to fear. Pride, that old betrayer, stiffened my spine. I was Elias, skilled in woodcraft, equipped with reason, tools, and blade. I could manage this. And so, I remained. But caution now governed my actions. I laid subtle tripwires, nothing lethal, merely noisemakers fashioned from twine and tin cups, around the camp's perimeter. I shifted my tent for optimal sight lines. The knife became a constant companion, its presence a grim reassurance against the persistent internal whisper that I was courting disaster. The day passed without incident. I hiked, fished, even found moments where the sun's warmth and the forest's ambient peace began to loosen the knot of anxiety in my gut. Yet, as dusk began to weave its gray threads through the trees, the unease returned, a cold stone settling low. That night I lay fully dressed within the tent, ears tuned to the nocturnal symphony, interpreting every creak and rustle as potential menace. The hours crawled by undisturbed, and a fragile hope began to bloom. Perhaps the previous night's intrusion was an anomaly, a singular event. This nascent hope disintegrated at dawn. Unzipping the tent, I stepped out to stretch protesting muscles in the cool air. And then I saw it. Dangling from a low-slung branch of a nearby oak, swaying slightly, was a small doll. It was ancient, begrimed, its dress a faded relic, its plastic face marred by scratches and time. A visceral crawl prickled my skin as I approached it cautiously. It hadn't been there yesterday. Of that, I was utterly certain. Closer still, I saw it hung by a crude noose of fishing line. I stared, mind frantically trying to process the implication. This was no accident, no figment. Someone was present, observing, engaged in a perverse, silent dialogue of intimidation. With unsteady hands, I severed the line and bundled the grotesque effigy into my pack, unable to endure its macabre vigil. Turning back towards my camp, intent now only on escape, my eyes caught another detail. My carefully placed tripwires, triggered. Not sprung by clumsy wildlife, but deliberately disabled. The twine severed with chilling precision, likely by a knife. Panic surged, hot and suffocating. Whoever haunted these woods had been inside my perimeter, again, while I slept, close enough to breathe on my tent fabric, and I had remained oblivious. Gear was hurled into the backpack with frantic abandon, orders sacrificed to speed. Each chirp of a bird, each sigh of wind through the pines, became a potential harbinger. I kept glancing towards the tree line, half expecting a figure to emerge. That dreadful doll held forth like a trophy. Just as I wrestled the pack onto my shoulders, ready to bolt, I heard it. A whistle, low and eerily melodic, drifting from the trees to my left. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The whistle sounded again, closer, then a voice, coarse and deep, scraping against the silence. Leaving so soon. But the game's just begun. I ran. Thought ceased. Instinct took command. I plunged into the undergrowth, heedless of direction, map, or compass. Branches lashing my face and arms like thorny whips. Behind me, chillingly distinct, came the sound of laughter, followed by the heavy tread of pursuit. I ran until my lungs burned like acid and my legs were leaden pistons. The forest became an undifferentiated blur, a bewildering labyrinth of green and brown. Stopping was unthinkable. Looking back, an invitation to capture. Bursting through a dense thicket of young pines, I glimpsed it, a shallow cave mouth, partially obscured by a jumble of mossy boulders. Without a second's pause, I dove headlong into the opening, pressing my body flat against the cold, damp stone, seeking refuge in the earth's embrace. How long I remained huddled there, scarcely daring to draw breath, I cannot say. The sounds of pursuit eventually receded, yet the terror held me pinned. Hours bled into one another. The light filtering through the cave entrance gradually softened, announcing evening's arrival. My muscles screamed from the sustained tension. Thirst was a physical clawing in my throat. Still, I didn't stir. Only when the first stars pricked the darkening canvas outside did I muster the courage to peer from my stone sanctuary. The woods were steeped in quiet, deceptively peaceful. No sign of my tormentor. Slowly, agonizingly, I crawled out. I was lost, bereft of gear save the knife I'd inexplicably kept clutched, without sustenance or water. But I was alive, and for the moment, free. Choosing a direction purely by instinct, I began to walk, knowing only that movement was survival, that eventually, this wilderness must yield to a path, a road, a sign of the world beyond. I walked through the night, a nerve-jangled automaton starting at every shadow, convinced each gust of wind carried that haunting whistle. Dawn was painting the sky when I finally stumbled, quite literally, onto a marked hiking trail. Relief washed over me, so potent it brought tears to my eyes. I followed its course, feet raw and blistered, clothes shredded, until the squat form of a ranger station materialized through the trees. My disheveled state and fractured narrative alarmed the rangers. A search party was dispatched, but the forest yielded no secrets. No disturbed campsite. No footprints save my own frantic ones. No macabre doll. Just miles of indifferent, untouched woods. As I sat cocooned in a scratchy blanket, cradling a mug of scalding coffee, the certainty settled deep within me that this wasn't concluded, that somewhere in that vast, silent expanse, an unseen watcher remained, patient, perhaps even smiling, ready to resume the game. I never camped alone again. The profound peace I once harvested from solitude had been irrevocably poisoned, supplanted by a low-grade, persistent apprehension. Every foray into the woods now is shadowed by the reflexive glance over my shoulder, the constant straining of ears for the telltale snap of a twig, the distant echo of a whistle. The wilderness was meant to be my refuge, my cathedral. Now, I understand its deeper truth. Sometimes the most perilous predators are those who walk upright, leaving behind only the chilling vapor of fear, and, perhaps, a forgotten battered doll as their sole, disturbing signature. An empty living room, I discovered, possesses its own peculiar weight. When I first unlocked the door to my new apartment, it was this vast chamber that commanded attention. A sweep of polished, honey-toned floorboards reflecting the stark white canvas of the walls. A corner unit, blessed with generous windows that drank in the city street below. Elsewhere, necessities had begun to accumulate. A mattress on a simple frame, a compact dining set, a scattering of chairs, the necessary altar of desk and computer. But the living room remained a void, an echoing pause in the apartment's layout. I reasoned with myself, accumulate funds, then perhaps a sofa, a low table, maybe shelving. For the interim, I found a strange solace in the resonance of my own footsteps across that bare expanse. The first fisher in the quiet appeared on a Tuesday, roughly 2 weeks after my arrival. 9 o'clock, the city settling outside. I was hunched over my laptop at the dining table, tying up loose ends from work. The living room archway gaped nearby, a space my gaze often wandered towards, drawn by its sheer openness. Then it came, a protracted grating sound, the distinct screech of furniture dragged unwillingly over a hard surface. Perhaps 2 seconds it lasted, enough to send a jolt through my chest. Laptop shoved aside, I rose, logic suggesting the tenant overhead. Yet, as I reached the threshold, silence reigned. I stood, peering into the unadorned space. A single overhead fixture provided illumination. I flicked the switch. The room stared back, immutable. Barren floor, vacant walls, utterly devoid of furniture or any sign of disturbance. I extinguished the light, retreating to my table, a tremor of unease beneath the rational explanation of mundane building acoustics. In the ensuing days, the sounds became reluctant companions, typically arriving with the dusk. Sometimes a brief, sharp shriek, like a table leg catching on the grain of the wood. Other times, a muffled thud, suggesting something cumbersome bumping against plaster. I marshaled my defenses, the television's manufactured chatter, the mantra that old structures groan and settle, that neighbors rearrange their lives and belongings at odd hours. Yet, a disquieting certainty grew. The sounds originated within my living room, echoing not from above or below, but from the heart of that empty space itself. One Saturday evening, a test. Lights off. I positioned myself in the living room, spine pressed against the cool wall, and simply listened. Stillness stretched, thick and expectant, for perhaps 10 minutes. Then, a whisper of friction from the far corner, faint but undeniable. I angled my head, straining to pinpoint it. It repeated, the ghost of a small table being nudged across the floorboards. As I pushed myself to my feet, silence snapped back instantly. My palms were slick, my throat constricted. I slapped the light switch. Emptiness greeted me. Crouching, I ran my hand over the floor where the sound seemed born. Smooth, cool, unmarked. A tightness seized my chest, the sudden vacuum of sound more alarming than the noise itself. My skin prickled. Sleep became a shallow pool that night. Lying rigid in bed, ears tuned to the apartment's subtle language, I caught a few distant thuds near midnight, then nothing more substantial. I drifted off, clinging to the explanation of imagination, amplified by the room's resonant hollowness. But days later, the sounds shed their tentative nature. They were no longer whispers, but declarations. The unmistakable heave and drag of furniture traversing the room, protracted journeys from one wall to the opposite, sometimes persisting for a full minute. I would burst in, flooding the space with light, only to find absolute vacancy. The air itself felt chilled. A faint ringing lingered in my ears, my own pulse a frantic drum against my temples. Evening's approach began to carry a charge of anxiety. I found myself circumventing the living room, keeping the door shut, forfeiting the view of that open space after dark. I mentioned the noises to Cale, a friend. He chuckled, suggesting a spectral interior decorator. The jest landed poorly. He proposed recording the phenomena, proof against my own senses. That night, I placed my phone on the living room floor, initiated a voice recording, and fled the apartment for the anonymity of a diner. Upon returning, the phone lay screen down, though nothing else appeared touched. The recording spanned nearly an hour. Much of it was a low hiss, ambient static. Around the 20-minute mark, a strange, low-frequency buzz surfaced. Later, sporadic clicks and pops. Then, nearing 40 minutes, came a stretch of distorted sound, unnervingly close to hushed, sibilant whispers, impossible to decipher. This disturbed me more profoundly than clear sounds of moving furniture. It felt intimate, directed. I archived the file on my computer, resolving to try another tack. I started logging the occurrences, around 8 in the evening, often a single, sharp scrape. Near 10, shorter, intermittent bursts. Sometimes closer to midnight, it escalated into what sounded like a wholesale reconfiguration. Heavy pieces dragged with enough force to make the very walls hum, the floor beneath my feet sometimes transmitting a sympathetic quiver. I attempted to engage Mr. Thorne, the building manager. He ascended the stairs, stood impassively in the living room for 5 minutes, shrugged, and advised me to call if it happened again. Naturally, during his brief tenure, the room remained impeccably silent. One night, resolve hardened within me. I would occupy the living room, stand sentinel until the sounds manifested in my presence. I extinguished all other lights, leaving only the living room's stark overhead fixture burning. I planted myself in the center of the floorboards. Tension knotted my shoulders. My breath hitched in shallow puffs. I waited. My phone displayed 9:17 p.m. 10 minutes crawled by in silence. Then, around 9:30, a scraping noise, unnervingly close, near the wall directly behind me. I spun, nearly stumbling. White paint met my gaze. I advanced towards that wall, half expecting phantom furniture to coalesce from the plaster. Empty wall. Empty floor. A muffled thud resonated from the opposite side of the room. I whirled again, heart hammering. The overhead light flickered just once. A momentary lapse. Adrenaline surged, fight or flight screaming in my veins. But my eyes registered only the hollow expanse. The sounds persisted sporadically, a phantom ballet shifting across the room. I felt the vibrations ascend through the soles of my shoes. Perspiration beaded on my skin despite the cool night air. After several minutes of this auditory siege, my nerve fractured. I backed out of the room, pulled the door shut, and leaned against it, forehead damp, stomach churning. In my bedroom, I tried music, hoping to drown out the unseen activity. The living room noises amplified, seemingly in direct response, the dragging sounds deepening, acquiring a greater weight. Distant knocks punctuated the dragging. I returned to the hallway, rapping my knuckles against the living room door, feeling absurd. The noises ceased. Buoyed by a flicker of courage, I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. Silence. I stood there, breathing raggedly. Then a faint tremor beneath my feet again, as if something scraped along the floor just behind me. I slammed the door shut, retreated to my bedroom, and engaged the lock. I lay awake, pulse thundering, until sheer exhaustion claimed me around 3 in the morning. The next day, I experimented. Dragging a kitchen chair produced a similar pitch, yes. Shoving a small cabinet mimicked the heavier vibrations, somewhat. But memory insisted the living room sounds were more forceful, more resonant, possessed of a complex layering, as if multiple unseen objects moved in concert. My recording, useless beyond its static and unsettling whispers, offered no comparison. I cautiously queried Mrs. Gable, my neighbor across the hall. Had she noticed any unusual noises? She shook her head, remarking only that my unit was notably larger than most. Was I enjoying the extra space? I mumbled an affirmative, withholding the truth, unwilling to sound unhinged. Her unawareness solidified my isolation. Perhaps the walls were thick, cocooning me with the phenomenon. A few nights later, another strategy. Leave the living room door ajar. Illuminate both the hallway and the room itself. I stood at the threshold, a sentry watching an empty stage. Around 10, a subtle tremor rippled through the floorboards. My eyes darted to the corner, vacant. Another ripple. My calf muscles tightened. A scraping sound ripped through the air. Loud, sharp, undeniably, a heavy wooden leg protesting against the floor. The overhead light held steady, yet the illumination felt strangely diminished. My breathing grew shallow. I took a step into the room. The noise instantly ceased, leaving only a faint buzzing in my ears. My arms felt clammy. My head throbbed. Then, a knock echoed against the wall directly beside me. I flinched violently. Pressing my palm to the spot, the plaster felt unnaturally cold. Solid. I tapped back tentatively. No reply. My heart hammered against my ribs. Over the next hour, I became trapped in a bizarre rhythm, making 5 or 6 forays into that room. Each entry silenced the sounds. Each retreat seemed to invite their return. Sometimes, halfway down the hall, a scrape would erupt behind me. I'd whip around to face the empty doorway, goose flesh rising along my arms. A game of acoustic hide-and-seek with an invisible opponent. It culminated one Sunday night. I was attempting to watch television in my bedroom around 11. The cacophony from the living room drowned out the dialogue. Deep thuds, long sliding noises, intermittent taps against the walls. It sounded like a frantic, large-scale rearrangement, unseen hands hauling heavy pieces, shoving them against the plaster. The vibrations traveled through my mattress. My stomach clenched. Leaving the apartment felt like surrender, yet staying felt like madness. A perverse curiosity, a need to witness the crescendo, kept me rooted. Finally, I rose, marched to the living room door, and threw it wide. The sound died mid-scrape. I stepped inside, phone flashlight beam supplementing the overhead glare. I swept the light across every surface. Walls, floor, the tightly shut windows, bare floor, unmarred walls. My arms felt leaden, my mouth arid. Who's here? My voice cracked, swallowed by the emptiness. This time I switched to video recording. I aimed the phone at the room's center, panning slowly. For moments, only my ragged breathing filled the audio. Then a distinct scrape originated from behind the phone. I spun, camera following. The screen showed only the blank wall. My heart pounded violently. I continued filming, rotating slowly, desperately hoping to capture something tangible. Another thud from the far corner. Visually, nothing. After 5 agonizing minutes, I stopped recording. The playback was corrupted, bizarrely distorted with static lines and glitching frames. The audio track hissed with crackling bursts and something disturbingly akin to breathy murmurs. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. The phone's battery, nearly full moments before, had plummeted from 80% to 15% during those 5 minutes of recording. An unprecedented drain. Certainty solidified. This was beyond faulty plumbing or settling foundations. I had no clear path forward, only the stark realization that cohabitation was untenable. I scoured the floor again for hidden panels, tapped every inch of wall space. Solid, mundane. Mr. Thorne confirmed the unit below remained vacant. Trapped. The word echoed the room's emptiness. Bringing in outsiders felt futile. The phenomenon seemed coy, retreating in the presence of witnesses, leaving me appearing paranoid. The day after that Sunday, I maximized my time outside. Coffee shops, long walks, lingering at Kyle's apartment. But returning home invariably meant confronting that oppressive atmosphere, the sounds reliably commencing as darkness fell. I felt frayed, eroded. My nerves were raw. I snapped at colleagues, my focus shattered. The thought of selling, despite the fresh move and sunk costs, began to feel less like defeat and more like survival. On what I knew would be my final night tolerating it, I stood once more in the hallway, gazing through the open living room doorway. The overhead light gave a single, weak flicker, but held. A solitary dragging sound commenced, long and deliberate, traversing the room from left to right. A cold current traced my spine. My hands trembled. I took a step back, then hesitated, stepping forward again. The sound ceased. I became aware I was clenching my jaw so tightly it ached. I pulled the door shut, turned the lock, and retreated to my bedroom, locking that door too. Every light blazed. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the sliver of light beneath the door. I waited. faint scraping noise permeated the walls. I clamped headphones on, blasted music, a desperate attempt at insulation. That was the fracture point. The next morning, I called a realtor. The financial loss was irrelevant noise against the backdrop of the preceding weeks. Explanations remain vague. If pressed about leaving so soon, I speak of unforeseen issues, a place that simply didn't fit. I don't mention the phantom furniture, the dragging and knocking that defied physics, the recordings that captured only whispers and glitches. The truth resides deeper, a visceral memory of how that room felt, how its vibrations seemed to burrow into my very bones. Those scraping sounds are etched into my auditory memory. Proximity is unthinkable. And that, irrevocably, is why no room under my stewardship will ever again be permitted to remain so profoundly empty. Instinct arrives unannounced, a whisper before the mind grasps the words. One moment, Alara drifted along the woodland path, absorbed in the scent of damp earth and pine, the rhythmic percussion of fallen leaves beneath her boots. Familiarity cloaked the woods, a comforting silence, until it fractured. Abruptly, the air shifted, charged with a nameless disquiet, the sort of primal alert you feel deep in your bones, long before reason can articulate the threat. Solitude was Alara's chosen companion on these excursions, particularly within this less trodden preserve. Its obscurity promised refuge from the clamor of crowds, offering communion solely between herself and the breathing wilderness. This specific trail, a clandestine artery branching from the recognized routes, was her own discovery, a slender ribbon winding into the forest's deeper secrets. She hadn't plumbed its full extent before. Today, however, exploration tugged at her. The further she ventured, the more profound the stillness became. The customary chatter of the forest, the scolding jays, the furtive rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, gradually dissolved, leaving only the sighing wind and the cadence of her own passage. Initially, it wasn't unnerving. A profound peace settled, amplified by the cathedral-like canopy overhead. Ancient trees laced their fingers high above, filtering the sun into ephemeral, shifting mosaics on the forest floor, painting the ground in long, wavering shadows. But then, the prickle. A distinct sensation crawling up her spine, undeniable as a physical touch. She was being observed. Alara halted, every nerve straining against the quiet. Nothing but the wind's murmur through the leaves, yet the fine hairs on her nape prickled with awareness. Her gaze swept the dense assembly of trunks, searching for any flicker of movement, any incongruous shape. Emptiness greeted her, just Alara, alone in the vast green. She attempted to dismiss the feeling, a flicker of paranoia born from the deepening isolation, and pressed onward. Yet the sensation intensified with each step, solidifying into a certainty. Unseen eyes were fixed upon her, boring out from the shadowed recesses between the trees. And then she saw it. A form materialized in the distance, perfectly still upon the path ahead. Alara froze, her heart commencing a frantic tattoo against her ribs. Perhaps 100 feet separated them. Details remained obscured by the distance and the play of light, resolving only into the stark silhouette of a man, tall and utterly immobile. A flicker of rational thought suggested turning back, seeking the known path. Encounters weren't unheard of, Surely, but this felt intrinsically different. An unnatural rigidity held him captive, a stillness too profound, like sculpted stone rather than living flesh. And his arrival had been soundless. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twig, simply presence where moments before there had been none. A tentative hand lifted, a hesitant wave offered to the void. Hello. Her voice sounded unnervingly loud, swallowed by the immense quiet. Silence answered. The figure remained a statue facing her. Though his features were indistinct, she felt the weight of his scrutiny. Her intuition screamed retreat, a primal urge to flee, yet her feet felt rooted to the earth. It's fine, she told herself, grasping for normalcy. Just another hiker, maybe disoriented. But a deeper, colder knowledge insisted otherwise. Something about him resonated with wrongness. Slowly, Alara took a single, cautious step forward, her eyes locked on the distant shape. Another step. As if tethered by an invisible thread, the figure mirrored her advance, stepping forward in perfect synchrony. Alara stopped. So did he. Ice flooded her veins. Testing the impossible, she took a deliberate step backward. Again, the echo of movement from the figure. He stepped back, then forward again. When she did, panic flared, hot and sharp. Whatever game this was, she had no desire to learn the rules. She pivoted, her walk quickening into a brisk retreat along the path she'd just traveled. She resisted the urge to look back, focusing on the trail ahead, on escape. But after perhaps a minute, the compulsion became unbearable. A stolen glance over her shoulder confirmed the terror. Pursuit. Through the flickering gaps in the trees, she could discern the silhouette, still distant but steadily, relentlessly closing the gap. His pace wasn't hurried, but inexorable, as if time itself was on his side. Her brisk walk bled into a jog, then dissolved into a desperate sprint. The absurdity of her flight, a scene ripped from some cheap thriller, was lost beneath the consuming need to get away. The path coiled and twisted, momentarily obscuring her pursuer, but the gut-wrenching sensation of being hunted, a cold pressure at her back, never abated. Her breath came in ragged bursts, lungs burning, muscles screaming protest as she forced herself faster. The main trail felt impossibly far, though logically she knew it couldn't be. Then finally, she erupted from the dense woods onto the familiar breadth of the main path, stumbling to a halt, gasping, her heart hammering painfully against her ribs. She spun, eyes frantically scanning the tree line from which she'd emerged, bracing for him to step out. Nothing. The narrow path exhaled only emptiness, the trees swaying benignly in the breeze. No footsteps, no silhouette, no trace. As if he'd been nothing more than a phantom conjured by the shadows. She stood there, catching her breath, her mind struggling to reconcile the visceral terror with the sudden, baffling normalcy. Had the isolation played tricks on her senses? Had fear manifested a specter from the whispering woods? No. The image was seared behind her eyes. The stillness, the mirroring, the silent pursuit. He was real. She didn't linger. The remaining distance to the parking lot was covered at a near run, punctuated by frantic glances over her shoulder, half expecting to see the tall figure emerge onto the path behind her. But the trail remained resolutely empty. Reaching her car felt like breaching a final sanctuary, though the feeling was thin. She threw her pack onto the passenger seat, fumbled with the locks, her hands still trembling. The key stuttered in the ignition as her brain churned, replaying the inexplicable encounter. Driving away, the rearview mirror became an oracle of dread, checked compulsively, anticipating the sight of him standing at the edge of the lot, watching her departure. But the road behind remained vacant. Miles dissolved beneath the tires, the park shrinking in the distance, yet the chilling sensation persisted. The feeling of being watched, the unnerving possibility that one glance in the mirror would reveal him seated silently behind her, staring. For days, the memory clung like mist. Sleep offered little respite. The silent watcher haunted her waking thoughts. She reasoned it away. A peculiar individual, perhaps playing a cruel prank. Yet, deep down, that explanation felt hollow. There was an alien quality to his stillness, his noiseless movement, his silent, mimicking pursuit, that felt divorced from the merely human. A week later, bolstered by the presence of her friend, Liam, Ilara returned to the park. They kept to the main, sun-dappled trails, and the woods seemed welcoming, ordinary. But as they approached the spot where the hidden path should have diverged, Ilara stopped. She walked to the precise point where the narrow track had begun its descent into the deeper woods. Nothing. The trees stood dense and unbroken, the undergrowth thick and undisturbed. No sign of a path, no fissure in the foliage, no memory etched into the earth. It was as if it had been swallowed whole, or perhaps had never been there at all. Liam looked at her, his expression puzzled. "Are you certain it was here?" he asked, his voice reasonable. Ilara nodded, a cold, unsettling certainty settling in her gut, churning like nausea. She was sure. She had walked that path. She had fled that path. But now, the forest presented an impassive, unyielding wall, guarding a secret she couldn't prove, yet could never forget. Mid-Sunday, the quiet rupture of my afternoon arrived as an envelope, ancient and unstamped, resting on the doormat. My name, Elias Thorne, was scrawled across its face, the graphite letters tremulous, as if etched in near darkness. A premonitory chill traced my spine before my fingers even brushed the brittle paper. It exuded a scent of dust and forgotten things, the aroma of attics sealed for generations. Inside, divorced from context or explanation, a single imperative, repeated in a frantic, looping script. Come. What summons? From whom? The stark command offered no coordinates, no chronology. Just come. I placed it on the kitchen counter, a knot tightening in my chest, attempting a dismissal. A prank, perhaps, or some bizarre viral marketing. Routine beckoned. I submerged myself in the Monday grind, feigning normalcy. But returning home, I found its twin slipped beneath the threshold. Same archaic vessel, same sepulchral scent, same solitary word. Come. Cold clench seized my gut. I scanned the deserted hallway. No lingering presence, no displaced dust, no echo of footsteps. Locking the door felt insufficient. I stood clutching the envelope, palms slick, mind a frantic kaleidoscope of unanswerable questions. Eventually, I consigned it to a drawer, seeking refuge in the mundane ritual of dinner. Tuesday morning yielded a third missive, lodged within the mailbox's metal mouth. Again, no postage, no origin, only the insistent plea. Come. The script had swelled, bolder now, desperate for notice. The constriction in my chest returned. Indoors, I compulsively checked my phone. No unfamiliar calls, no cryptic texts. Silence. I sank onto the sofa, the television flickering unseen images as my gaze kept straying to the front door, half expecting a cascade of envelopes to materialize from the ether. By week's end, the count stood at 5, each a replica, time-worn envelopes, faded paper whispering of decay, that pervasive musty odor, and the unwavering, singular command, come. My nightly rituals grew obsessive, locks tested, windows secured. A persistent sensation of being observed prickled my skin. Every nocturnal sound, a branch rapping glass, the distant sigh of tires, became a potential harbinger, jolting me from uneasy sleep into sweat-soaked awareness. I'd listen, straining for the rustle near my door, only to be met with profound silence. On the 6th day, a strange certainty bloomed within me, an inexplicable directive. The letters offered no destination, yet my thoughts coalesced around the derelict train station, slumbering on the town's periphery. A place I knew only by sight. Boarded windows, warning signs. A monument to obsolescence I'd glimpsed once from a passing car. No conscious memory tethered me to it. Still, I awoke that morning possessed by the conviction that this was the nexus, the silent target of those relentless summons. A tremor ran through me, part fear, part resignation. Ignoring it no longer felt like an option. Compelled, I drove, leaving the town's familiar grid for the skeletal remains of the station. I parked beside a filigree of rust that had once been a fence. Noon sunlight struggled through a leaden overcast, leaching the world of color. An uneasy current traveled up my neck as I exited the car. The station itself stood gray and violated, tattooed with graffiti, its upper windows as dark, vacant eyes. Wind moaned through loose boards. Stepping over skeletal debris, I circled the building, seeking entry, seeking answers. A breach in the fence offered passage. Beyond lay an old loading dock, its concrete fractured, cradling stagnant puddles. The air hung thick with the miasma of mildew and phantom oil. My heart hammered against my ribs. Picking my way through shattered glass, I noticed a massive cargo door, askew, revealing a sliver of interior. A faint luminescence pulsed within, a failing fluorescent tube, perhaps, with a weak beam of a torch. I peered inside, expectation coiled, waiting for a figure to emerge. Nothing. Hesitantly, I crossed the threshold. The vast space was dominated by a single rocking chair, positioned dead center, angled towards me, directly beneath a sputtering overhead light. Otherwise, emptiness reigned, save for rusted machinery, hugging the walls and skeletal crates huddled in a corner. Dust motes danced in the weak light. Then, a sound. The distinct, dry squeak of the rocking chair. My gaze snapped towards it. Empty. Yet it swayed, a gentle, rhythmic motion, as if recently vacated. My chest seized. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I scanned the shadowed periphery, anticipating emergence. Revelation. Silence answered. Minutes stretched, thick with uncertainty. The chair's rhythmic complaint grated, raising the hairs on my arms. The urge to speak, to demand, lodged unspoken in my throat. Slowly, drawn against my better judgment, I approached the chair. Old wood, paint flaking from the arms, the seat coated in a fine gray powder. Scuff marks scarred the floor beneath its rockers, testament to its recent, spectral animation. No letters lay nearby, no notes, no clues. The futility of it washed over me. This was madness. I retreated from the loading bay, gulping air, striving for composure. A cursory circuit of the station's exterior yielded nothing further. Disappointment warred with a creeping sense of foolishness. I had chased whispers to an abandoned husk, finding only an empty, oscillating chair beneath a dying light. Retreating to my car, I cast glances over my shoulder, skin cold, clammy. The drive home was a blur of self-recrimination, overshadowed by the unshakable feeling that I had merely disturbed the surface of something vast and incomprehensible. The letters resumed their silent infiltration, slipped beneath my door in the ensuing days. Their tenor shifted. They spoke now of us, of our memories, yet remained stubbornly anonymous, their author shrouded. The envelope seemed older, more fragile, the handwriting escalating towards frenzy. That same musty signature clung to them. I tried discarding them, only to retrieve them moments later, scrutinizing the frantic script for some overlooked detail. Late one night, a soft thud echoed from the hallway. My heart leaped. Wrenching the door open, I hoped to confront the messenger. Emptiness greeted me. On the floor lay another envelope. Trembling hands tore it open. "We are waiting," the shaky script declared. A knot formed in my throat. I wanted to roar into the vacant corridor, to summon the tormentor from the shadows. Instead, I stood frozen, ears ringing. Back inside, the deadbolt slid home. My apartment felt suddenly constricting, the corners accusatory. I stuffed the letter into the overloaded drawer and sought refuge in bed. But sleep offered no escape. Only fractured visions of a lone rocking chair swaying beneath the flickering bulb. The following day, I feigned illness, calling off work. The thought of interaction, of open spaces, felt unbearable. Paranoia was my constant companion. I spent hours monitoring the hallway through the peephole's distorted lens. Around noon, the inertia became intolerable. Action was needed. Calling the authorities felt absurd. What proof existed beyond cryptic notes and a disquieting feeling about a derelict building? No tangible threat, no trespass, no harm. It smacked of delusion, easily dismissed. Pulling on a jacket, I fled the apartment, seeking air, clarity. I walked the neighborhood streets, scanning faces. Each glance returned feeling like scrutiny, each passerby a potential suspect. Relaxation remained elusive, my gut twisting with suspicion. That evening, returning to the suffocating familiarity of my flat, I found it. Another envelope. This one spoke of the place where we meet, directing me back to the station's loading dock. And for the first time, it named a time. Midnight. My pulse became a frantic drum against my ribs. Ignore it. The thought screamed, but a deeper, more insidious current pulled me towards acquiescence. The not knowing was becoming unbearable. Fear warred with the desperate need for resolution. The hours until midnight crawled. I paced the confines of my apartment, wrestling with the impulse to call someone, anyone. In the end, I left my phone on the kitchen counter, gripped by a chilling, perhaps irrational, certainty that involving others would somehow contaminate the encounter, frighten away the architect of this unease. Tension coiled in my muscles, my jaw aching from clenching. The image of the rocking chair burned behind my eyes. Near 11:30, armed with only a flashlight, I drove back into the night. The roads were deserted arteries under the sodium glow. Each mile marker amplified the thudding in my chest. Parking near the skeletal fence, I found the station swallowed by darkness, save for the moon's intermittent caress through drifting clouds. Shadows writhed. Slipping through the fence, the uneven ground threatened my footing. My flashlight beam carved slices through the gloom, illuminating the familiar puddles, the glittering shards of glass. The stale air pressed close. My own breath sounded unnaturally loud. The cargo door groaned open under my touch. Inside, the single light still flickered, weaker now, casting the rocking chair in stark relief. It occupied the same space, facing the entrance, moving with that same slow, deliberate sway, as if expecting me. I froze, every nerve taut. My light swept the cavernous interior. Walls, crates, shadows. An immense, hollow silence enveloped me. Then I saw them. A scatter of envelopes on the floor beside the chair's base. All addressed to me. Elias Thorne. My chest tightened painfully. Moving closer, I stooped, picking one up. The familiar dusty scent rose to meet me. "We remember," the note inside whispered. My mouth turned to sand. I snatched another. "We are connected." A cascade of icy sweat traced my spine. Again, the flashlight beam interrogated the darkness. Surely, someone lurked behind the crates, within the deepest shadows. Nothing. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. My breathing grew shallow, ragged. More envelopes yielded similar pronouncements. Memories shared, connections forged, the patient vigil. Confusion warred with a primal dread. Who was we? I stood adrift in that vast, echoing space for what felt like an eternity, though likely mere minutes passed. The rocking chair punctuated the silence with another soft creak. "Who's there?" The whispered question died in the heavy air. No reply. A step back, hands unsteady. The urge to flee battled the gnawing need to understand. Possibilities churned. A forgotten acquaintance nursing a bizarre grudge. A stranger's elaborate, motiveless game. No explanation felt solid. Finally, the oppressive weight of the room, the feeling of being watched by the very emptiness, became unbearable. I turned, retreating towards the door. As I crossed the threshold, one final, mournful creak echoed from the chair. I didn't look back. I hurried through the darkness, the cargo door thudding shut behind me like a final punctuation. The night air outside felt sharp, clean, yet offered no solace. Reaching my car, each backward glance revealed only darkness. The drive home was a white-knuckled ordeal. Back in the perceived safety of my apartment, another envelope lay waiting beneath the door. A wave of nausea washed over me. Reluctantly, inevitably, I picked it up. My fingers, still trembling, tore it open. This isn't over. The floor seemed to drop away. I stood in the silent hallway, listening to the frantic pulse in my ears, my skin alive with 1,000 phantom touches. And so, here I remain, caught in this terrifying loop. The letters persist, summoning me back to that desolate place, hinting at shared histories I cannot grasp, offering no quarter, no clarity. My nerves are frayed wires. The identity of my tormentor, their purpose, remains shrouded. The fear of losing my grip on reality is constant, yet the compulsion to answer the summons, to seek the source, remains potent. I understand now that as long as the envelopes appear, bearing their musty scent and cryptic words, the pull will remain, a spectral tether. Where it leads, what awaits me should I return again, I cannot fathom. I am utterly alone in this, the tension ratcheting ever tighter. To resist feels futile. To yield feels like madness. Yet the harder I try to turn away, the more insistent the call becomes, whispering that escape is no longer an option. forest's first betrayal was subtle, the dry retort of a stepped-on twig, where only silence should have reigned. A breath held, a sudden stillness, and the tranquil woods I'd walked for hours warped into something watchful, malevolent. As twilight bled through the canopy, leaching color from the world, unfamiliar murmurs slithered between the ancient trunks. Dread, cold and sharp, pierced through my disorientation. I wasn't merely adrift, I was quarry. It was meant to be nothing more than communion with the wild, a ritual repeated across countless parks, countless dawns. Rise before the sun, chase the receding dark to the trailhead, immerse oneself in verdant solitude, and return, earth-scented and weary, before the dinner bell. But this excursion deviated. A novel path whispered about online, promised vertiginous climbs and vistas that stole the breath, a worthy crucible for my seasoned legs. Those initial hours unfolded like a dream of pine-sharp air and the confetti scatter of unseen wildflowers. Early on, the path offered fleeting kinship, nods exchanged with fellow pilgrims of the wilderness, but ascent brought isolation. By the meridian sun, I stood upon the crest, the world unfurled below, an undulating tapestry of emerald and jade stretching to a hazy horizon. Perched on a granite throne, I consumed my simple meal, intoxicated by the sheer scale of it all, sovereign of my temporary kingdom. Therein lay the fatal divergence. Rather than retrace my steps, I succumbed to the map's seductive alternative, a gentler descent, a promise of ease for joints weary from the climb. A choice whispered by convenience, yet one that would unravel my world. The alternate trail, at first, merely hinted at neglect. Overgrown, yes, but the blazes, though faded, still offered guidance. Yet, as I descended deeper into the forest's embrace, unease began to coil in my gut. Markers grew sporadic, then vanished. The defined track dissolved into tangled undergrowth, forcing frustrating detours, backtracking from impenetrable thickets. Hours bled away. By rights, the valley floor should have welcomed me. Instead, the sun dipped lower, painting the woods in long, skeletal shadows. My phone, predictably, offered only mocking silence. No signal. No digital lifeline in this remote expanse. Panic, a frantic bird, beat against my ribs. Lost. Utterly alone as night gathered its shroud. A ragged breath, an attempt at composure. Provisions remained. Water, compressed bars of energy, the small solace of a flashlight. Survival was possible. Survive the night, find clarity with the dawn, maintain reason. It was then the sound arose, a voice, thin but distinct, slicing through the gloom. Hello? Anyone out there? A surge of adrenaline, this time tinged with desperate hope. Others, fellow wanderers caught in this arboreal labyrinth, perhaps together. Yes! I yelled back, voice cracking. Over here! I'm lost! A pause, pregnant with silence. Then a different voice answered, closer now. We hear you. Don't move. We're coming. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm, hope warring with a newly seeded suspicion. They drew nearer, the crunch of leaves and snapping twigs announcing their passage. But the cadence of their calls. It wasn't the hesitant uncertainty of the lost. It held a chilling coordination, the practiced triangulation of a hunt. A glacial certainty slid through me. Not rescuers, not fellow hikers. Something other. And I, fool Reason vaporized. Instinct screamed. I bolted. Branches lashed my face. Thorns tore at my clothes as I plunged blindly through the deepening woods. Behind me, the pursuit erupted, pretense abandoned. Shouts echoed, sharp and purposeful, closing the distance relentlessly. She went this way. Head her off before the river. Fan out. Don't let her escape. River? My mental map held no river, but the word itself became a beacon, a desperate synonym for salvation. Reach water, follow its course, find civilization. I fled, lungs searing, the frantic thudding in my ears drowning out all else save the terror. Light failed utterly, transforming the familiar forest into a disorienting maze of phantom shapes. Stumbles became near falls, saved only by flailing hands, yet they persisted, an unseen, relentless pressure at my back. Just as exhaustion threatened to buckle my knees, a new sound whispered through the trees, the low, insistent rush of moving water. The river. Hope surged, lending wings to my failing limbs. I burst from the claustrophobic tree line onto a wide, stony shore. Before me, the river sprawled, dark and swift, too broad for any safe crossing in this Stygian gloom. Yet, it was the only path left. As I braced to commit myself to the churning current, a voice cracked like a whip, terrifyingly close. "Hold it right there." I spun, gasping. Figures materialized from the tree line. One, then two, three, coalescing into a grim assembly. They were clad in dark, practical clothing, and they carried, dear God, were those firearms. "Well now," drawled one stepping forward, clearly their alpha. His face, etched by wind and time, held no warmth. "Looks like we've flushed ourselves a stray ewe." "Please," I choked out, breath still ragged. I'm just hiking. I took a wrong turn. I don't want any trouble." His laugh was a shard of ice down my spine. "Oh, you're trouble, all right. Trespassing. These woods belong to us. We don't appreciate unexpected visitors." "I didn't know," I pleaded, mind scrambling for an escape route that didn't exist. "I'll leave right now. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone." He shook his head slowly, a cruel amusement twisting his lips. "Not quite that simple, little you. We have customs for dealing with those who wander where they shouldn't." The others closed ranks, their bodies forming an inescapable crescent. I saw it in their eyes, a predatory gleam, a shared, dark excitement. This was sport to them. I was the game. "What are you going to do?" I whispered, hating the tremor that betrayed my terror. The elder hunter's smile broadened, devoid of humor. "We believe in fairness, a sporting chance, a head start. You run, we hunt. Make it out of our woods before sunrise, you walk away free. If not..." The implication hung heavy and suffocating in the night air. My gaze darted wildly, the forest behind, now filled with hunters, the river before me, a churning abyss. Trapped. "1 minute," the man announced, consulting a worn timepiece. "Best make it count." For a heartbeat, paralysis held me fast, disbelief warring with primal fear. Then, the survival imperative surged. I pivoted and ran, not back into the shadowed woods, where their tracking skills reigned supreme, but parallel to the roaring water. Find a crossing, a bridge, anything. Behind me, the leader's voice boomed, laced with a chilling, festive mockery. "Ready or not, here we come." I ran as if propelled by demons. The uneven, rock-strewn bank was a treacherous gauntlet in the near-total darkness. More than once my ankles twisted, pitching me perilously close to the hungry current. Fear was my fuel. The sounds of pursuit, real or imagined, a constant goad. Time dissolved into a blur of pounding heartbeats and ragged breaths. Sometimes the crashing sounds behind seemed immediate. Other times, an unnerving silence descended, amplifying the river's roar and my own frantic gasps. Rounding a sharp bend, hope flared anew. A colossal tree, felled by some ancient storm, spanned the torrent, a natural, precarious bridge. Moss slicked its surface, river spray misted the air around it. A desperate gamble. I scrambled onto the trunk, balance tentative, inching across the roaring chasm below. One misstep meant oblivion. Halfway over, shouts erupted from the bank I'd just left. They'd spotted me. A crack split the night. A gunshot, the bullet thudding into the wood near my feet. I froze, momentarily petrified, then forced my limbs onward. Another shot, closer, whining past my head. Not aiming to kill, perhaps, just to terrify, to make me fall. With a final, lunging scramble, I reached the far bank, collapsing onto the damp earth. A single backward glance. They stood clustered on the opposite shore, the elder hunter watching, his expression a complex mix of fury and grudging admiration. "This isn't finished," his voice carried over the river's clamor. "These woods stretch for miles. Sunrise won't save you." But I was already moving, plunging into the unfamiliar wilderness on this side. He spoke truth, directionless, mapless, running on sheer terror and dwindling reserves. The remainder of the night passed in a fugue state of exhaustion and hypervigilance. Run, walk, crawl. Every rustle, every snap sent jolts of adrenaline through me, convinced they'd found a way across, that they were closing in once more. Then finally, blessedly, the oppressive darkness began to thin. The first tentative strokes of dawn painted the eastern sky, and through the thinning trees, a line, straight, unnatural, blessedly mundane, a road. Tears I hadn't known I possessed threatened to spill. A vehicle materialized in the distance, a slow-moving speck. I threw myself into its path, waving my arms like a scarecrow caught in a gale. The car eased to a stop. An elderly man peered out, his face creased with concern. "Lord almighty, child, are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't form. How could language possibly contain the horrors of the night? I managed only a mute shake of my head. "Best get you seen to," he said softly, pushing open the passenger door. As we pulled away, the forest retreated in the wing mirror, a dark, brooding presence. Somewhere within its depths, the hunters would be realizing their quarry had slipped the snare. A shudder traced its icy path down my spine. How many others, I wondered, hadn't reached the dawn? I never embraced the solitude of the trail again. Not truly. Sometimes, though, gazing at a path disappearing into dense woods, the memory surfaces, the echo of coordinated calls, the glint of predatory eyes. And I wonder if they are still out there, guardians of their dark traditions, waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting soul to choose the wrong